Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, we're going to be taking a look at the Paladin build. Now this is a build that I made a while back, and it was a build made for tanking dungeons and basically like a beginner tank for Templar. And it was one that lets you farm the dungeons, and it gives you really good playability. It gives you good playability not only in the dungeons but also in story mode or playing overland, whatever you want to call it, and it just works out really well. So let's go ahead and get into it. Taking a look at the build, you can see we are an Imperial Templar. Imperial is going to be one of the better races for this build because of the amount of health and stamina it gives you. As you can see, it gives us 35k health, 28k stamina. We do have a 17k magicka. We have 64 points into stamina. Now, a lot of people are going to say, why did you put points into stamina and not health? It's up to the player to decide where they put their attribute points for their playstyle. For this particular build, because it's made to work in both overland and in dungeons, primarily, not in trials, not in the end game, it is just there to help you have a good resource pool so you can sustain abilities and things like that, so you can play through the content. And also with that higher pool allows you to do a little bit more damage to enemies in the overland and in dungeons. Alright, as you can see though, you can take the 64 points out of stamina if you want and put it into health. That is up to you. Like I said, you do have 17k magicka, you have 35k health, 28k stamina, 805 magic recovery, 397 health recovery, and 692 stamina recovery. You do have a 2065 weapon damage with a 28.1% weapon critical. You have 22k spell and 22k physical resistance. Your physical resistance is a little bit higher, and you can adjust this in your CP. Alright, moving on, we have the Lord Mundustone. This increases your max health for that purpose only. And then you have Tri-Stat Food, which gives you max health, max magic, and max stamina. That's not showing you the values here. It's something with the PTS. Going on the inventory. In the inventory, food and potion wise, this is a tank build primarily, so using tripods is going to be your best option for when you're playing in dungeons. If you're playing in overland and you want to be able to have a little bit more crit and a little bit more weapon damage, the weapon power pots are really good for that. It gives you stamina, it gives you the stamina recovery, it gives you the major brutality, major savagery, and it just helps in that kind of playing field. Especially if you're solo farming an area, or you're playing through, say, Craglorn, or you're playing through some of the newer content, the newer expansion stuff, and you're facing off against a boss. Having that greater weapon damage and that greater weapon critical is going to help you sustain your playability in that content. Tri-Stat Food, of course, is going to be the food you're going to want to use, and I prefer long fin pasty and melon sauce. It's usually pretty cheap to get on the guild traders. Now, moving on to gear, starting with our monster set. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys right out the door. If you don't like this setup in the gear, you can use metagear. Metagear works fine. You can use Ebon, Alkosh, Bloodspawn if you want. You can use Ebon, Alkosh, and the monster set that is here. So the monster set we're using in Swarm is Swarm Mothers. Swarm Mothers is actually a really good monster set for any stamina-based tank. And not just stamina-based tank, but any tank in general that doesn't have a chain to pull enemies with. So if you don't have a Dragon Knight, this is a set that works really good for that, because it allows you to pull enemies to you by its benefit. So 1 piece stamina recovery, 2 piece. When you block an attack from an enemy that is further than 8 meters from you, you spin strands of spider silk to pull that enemy to you. This effect can occur once every second. Now, you can do this if you're doing a dungeon and you're hitting those ranged mobs with a ranged taunt. This will grab them and pull them to you. It works out really well, and it's probably the best set for it. So, moving on to the next set. Now, this is where people are going to question a lot of stuff, because why are you using a set like this? It's primarily to help you when you're doing overland stuff. And if you are doing dungeons and you want a little bit faster clear, I use Gladiators. Gladiators is a great set. 2-piece, 3-piece, weapon critical, 4-piece, weapon damage, 5-piece. When your target is under 25% health, you add 1800 weapon damage to your light and heavy attacks. Playing a sword and shield build, a lot of people don't realize that the primary way of you getting resources back is heavy attacks. The primary way that you're going to be applying your stuff from your weapons, your enchantments and stuff, or your buffs and debuffs from your weapons, is with light attacks. So using this really helps you sustain a decent amount of damage to those lower health enemies, so you can kill them faster when you're solo playing, or when you're even in a dungeon and you're trying to help your group deal some extra damage. Even against bosses, it helps. Moving on to the next set, we are using what's called the Brands of Imperium set. Now, this is a kind of a harder set to get. A lot of people have questioned this in the past and said, why do you choose this particular set for this build? Because it drops in the, I think it's White Gold Tower, or it's Imperial City Prison, one of the two. So the 2-piece max health, 3-piece max health, 4-piece healing taken, and then the 5-piece. When you take damage, you have a 10% chance to grant you and your allies within 8 meters a damage shield that absorbs 13,968 damage for 6 seconds. This effect can occur every 15 seconds. This is a really great carry set. And what I mean by carry is it helps you and your group stay alive a little bit. Because anytime you take damage, you have a 10% chance to grant you and your allies a shield. It lasts for 6 seconds out of the 15. You don't realize how fast 15 seconds goes by in this game when you're in combat, but it's really fast. So this actually procs a lot and stays up a lot. So it helps not only your group, it helps your healer with keeping people alive and getting heals on them and stuff like that. So it's a really good set for that particular thing. And that's why I said this is a really good starter tank build. Alright, so now we're going to move on to traits and enchants. Starting with the monster set Helm. Invigorating is a really good set for beginner tanks. Especially trait-wise, because it does increase your health, magic, and stamina recovery by 11. And you are using 2 pieces of Invigorating. You're using 1 helm, and you're using the legs. This is going to give you 22 added to your recovery. And it just helps you enough to help you sustain a little better. Now, on the chest piece, we are using Reinforce. This is going to enhance the resistance value of this piece. So your armor value is actually going to be higher by 16%. And using it on a chest piece and heavy armor is going to give you the highest amount of armor rating you can get. And this is going to help you stay alive. On the smaller pieces, we are using Sturdy with max health enchants. Now, the Sturdy is going to help you reduce the block cost. It's going to help you, with the health enchants, get higher health. And then on the bigger pieces, the helm, the chest, and legs, we are using Tri-Stat. This is going to maximize all 3 of your attributes, Max Magicka, Stamina, and Health. And it's going to help you sustain better. So, it's going to give you higher pools for sustain, and it's going to give you higher pools for utilizing abilities to your advantage. So, it's going to give you not only higher like attribute values, it's going to give you higher power to deal damage and other things. So it's really good to know how your attributes and everything work for you. So the small pieces, Sturdy, Healthy. The big pieces, you're going to want to go Invigorating, Tri-Stat, and then Tri-Stat Reinforced. Onto the jewelry. Now, jewelry you can have it any way you want. I like using this setup here because it leaves it all healthy on the jewelry, and it makes it really easy to still play this. And we put 2 weapon damage, or you can even use 2 block cost reduction. You can use 2 shield bashes, whatever you want that fits your playstyle. I prefer weapon damage because I like to get the most out of my build in the sense of ability power and everything else. So I want to make sure that I'm still getting that advantage, and if I don't have the weapon damage, I actually lose power in certain things. So I like having that higher weapon damage for certain abilities. So that's just a preferred play style. You can have whatever you want on the traits here. The last one, though, you're going to want that magic recovery on the necklace. And the reason for that is because Templars do use a lot of magicka-based abilities. And having... well, they don't use a lot. You wind up using a lot because of the way they work. And you want to be able to have a way to sustain it, but also a way to recover it. So having that decent amount of recovery plays really well into the build. Next up. And you can have, there's 2 options in the weapons you can use here. You can use sword and shield and a staff. And I would say using an ice staff would be better than any other staff. But you can use other ones, like you could even use a resto staff on the back bar. There's a really great ability in there. It's a shield, great for this. It's another way of keeping your group alive, helps out. But let's go ahead and see what we have here. We have a sword sharpened with a crusher enchant and a infused shield with a tri-staff. Templars don't need a lot of resistance because their buff gives them a ton of resistance. So they don't need the extra resistance as much as other classes do. So we can go infused here with the tri-stat on the shields. Both shields, front bar and back bar, are going to be this way. If you're using a staff on the back bar, don't worry about the extra tri-stat. Why sharpen? The sharpen here is basically because you can go infused or sharpen. Okay, your choice. I like using sharpen because it puts that extra penetration there for you. So it allows you to get that higher penetration value, which increases your DPS for yourself when you're out in the world playing solo, or you're playing in that dungeon and you're farming gear sets. This is going to help you out. It's going to help, you know, that's going to help you out. But the Crusher enchant is going to help you and your allies. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's only 811. It's really not worth it. Anything you can do to help your allies, or that anyone in your group can do to help your allies improve the group's DPS, is a benefit. Doesn't matter how small, doesn't matter how big. If you can help, do it. And this will help. So, next up we have our Weakening Enchant. And this is a really good one, especially for the back bar. Because you're going to be light attacking a lot on the back bar, and this is going to allow you to put that Weakening Enchant on the enemy, which reduces their weapon and spell damage by 226 for 5 seconds, and it also gives, it's infused, so it lasts longer, and it's more powerful. But the other reason for this is it helps keep you alive, and it helps keep your group alive. The more you can help increase their damage and reduce the incoming damage, the better. So if you're using an ice staff, I would suggest swapping these. Put the Weakening on the front bar and put an ice staff on the back bar with a Crusher. Crusher on an ice staff is way better than it is on a sword, hands down. I just like to use sword and shield on this build. So, alright, moving on now to skills. Now with this, I'm just going to go over the skills we have equipped. And I will say this, there are a lot of skills you can use in Overland, like Biting Jabs, Blinding Javelins. If you wanted to, you can even unlock Spear Shards and go with Lumina Shards or even Blazing Spear to give you a way of giving resources to your allies, or even just applying some extra damage for your group. It works out really well. And this is a suggestive setup. You don't have to use this exact one, but it does help. Alright, starting with the first ability we have on our bar, we have Pierce Armor. This applies Major Breach and Major Fracture, or just Major Breach, yeah, Major Fracture 2, which reduces spell and physical resist by 5,280, and it also taunts the enemy for 15 seconds. This is your primary taunt ability. Next ability we have is Deep Slash. This one applies minor maim. This reduces incoming damage again by 15%. And the reason for Deep Slash is Deep Slash will apply that minor maim to more than one target. So this can hit a total of 3 targets, and it'll apply this debuff to them. It also reduces their movement speed by 30% for 4 seconds, and it does a decent amount of damage. Next ability we have is Blazing Shield. Now this is a great ability. Regardless of what a lot of people think, Blazing Shield is a lot better to me than the other one. The other one doesn't do as much damage, and it does give you the same amount of shield strength, just a little better. So this one gives you a 12,432 point damage shield for 6 seconds. This portion of your ability scales off your max health, and each nearby enemy increases the shield strength by 4% when the shield is activated. When the shield expires, it explodes outwards, dealing 34% of the damage it absorbs back to the enemy. That's the other reason why I like it, is it deals damage back to the enemy when it ends, and it's a greater amount of damage than the other one offers, unless you're playing purely Magicka. Next up we have Absorb Missile. This is another great ability because it creates a damage shield for another 12k, and then when the shield persists, you are healed for X amount of health the next time a harmful direct damage projectile hits you. And this effect can occur once per cast. So once per cast you can get healed from this. That's the other reason why we want to use Absorb Missile. It has a great heal on it, and it's a really effective thing. Having this slotted though, doesn't do what it used to do, I don't think, in the past, where it gave you the block cost reduction and all that. It's just it's really good for that survivability. So next up is Echoing Vigor. Echoing Vigor is an optional one. I like this over the heal from the Restoring Light, the Rush Ceremony, and then morphed into either of the morphs here. It just works out better. A lot of people like to use Honor the Dead, and this is a really powerful ability. The problem is that it does cost Magicka, and it's a lot of Magicka. So you don't want to be spamming something that is like that. It's better to go with something smaller. You can also use Repentance here, which is another great heal for you and a way to get resources back from tanking. It's up to you. Next ability, and this is an optional ability. You can use whatever you want here. I like using this because I like to have an ability that does some damage. Especially when playing an Overland, or I'm playing through a public dungeon, or I'm playing through a delve, or whatever. I want to be able to deal out some extra damage, and this is a really great ability for that. It deals damage up front, it deals damage over time, and it also increases your weapon damage by 300 for 20 seconds when activated, and it's a super cheap ultimate, especially on a Templar. Moving to the back bar, we have our first ability, which is our Taunt, Inner Beast. This does a ranged taunt. It taunts the enemy for 15 seconds, and the enemy takes 5% more damage from attacks while the effect persists. Now, remember this. This thing increases the amount of damage you and your allies do by 5%. That's why I'm using Inner Beast. It also has a range synergy on it called Radiate, and if you taunt the enemy, there's a 50% chance to activate Radiate, which will deal magic damage to them over 3 seconds, and additional magic damage to all nearby enemies. Next ability we have is called Ring of Preservation. Now this is kind of a floater ability. Again, it's really up to the person playing the build if they want to use this. But what this does is this gives you and your allies minor protection, increasing the amount of damage you absorb by 8%. And it gives you minor endurance, which increases stam recovery by 10%, and you and your allies are healed for 523 every 0.5 seconds for the duration of 8 seconds. So if you put this down, you get higher higher survivability or damage reduction, plus you get a heal. So it really helps you and your allies stay alive, and that's the other reason why we go for the higher stamina pool. Is that higher stamina pool does increase the heal, and it helps in the long run, or even in the short run of a dungeon. Next ability we have is called Ritual of Retribution. Now, a lot of people are going to say, isn't the other one better? The one that does more healing? It's really questionable, I could say, because you have one that does better healing and removes more negative effects, or you have one that removes 2 negative effects, heals you and your allies, and also deals damage to enemies within the area for 12 seconds. And it's a great synergy for you and your group to use. And that's why I like using Ritual Retribution, because it deals both damage and healing, and it helps the group. So either way. Next up, we have Repentance. This is another great ability for you to use, and the reason I have it on the back bar is mainly for the purpose of having a way of getting resources if you don't have enough. So if there's any dead bodies nearby, you can activate this, and it works with multiple Templars, so it's not just one Templar can activate it. Multiple Templars can activate this. It does a heal, it restores stamina, and then while slotted, you gain major fortitude, or minor fortitude, minor endurance, and minor intellect, increasing health, stamina, and magic recovery by 10%. That's why I said you can have this on the front bar as well. So you can have this on both bars. Next ability we have is our Restoring Focus. Now this gives us our major resolve, increasing physical and spell resist by 50 to 80. This gives you that higher survivability, and it also restores stamina every second that you have this activated. So it lasts for 20 seconds. It's a super cheap stamina cost ability, and you're basically going to be reapplying this every 20 seconds. Standing in the circle increases your resistance, physical and spell resistance by 50%. This is where we get our really high resistance values. As you can see, we go to 30k spell, 30k physical, and we don't really need much more than that. So, works out really, really well. Next ability we have is called Aggressive Warhorn, and this is another great ability. So this one, you basically activate it. It's an ultimate. It costs 232 ultimate, and it gives magic and stamina increase by 10% for 30 seconds, and it also gives you and your allies major force, increasing critical damage by 15% for 10 seconds. Now, the nice thing about this is major force applies to damage abilities only. So I just want to remind that. So any ability you have that deals damage, including your Blazing Shield, which can crit, can be affected by that major force. As long as this has been activated while your Warhorn was up, you will get that major force applied to it. Even if the minor force, or major force wears off before this explodes, because you applied it before it exploded. So you still get that increased damage output even after it wears off. So that's why I like using Blazing Shield with that other ability. It works out really well. And a lot of people say, well, why would you want to increase your own DPS? Well, that's the thing you have to understand. Playing a tank doesn't mean that your character's completely impervious of doing anything other than being a meat shield. Your character does more than that in a group. Your character debuffs, buffs, taunts the enemy, reduces resistances. There's more to a tank than just that, though. Your tank can actually deal damage. Regardless of what anyone says, you're still dealing damage no matter what. Even if you're using Heroic Slash and, just taunt. You're still dealing a decent amount of damage. And that damage adds up over time. It's not a lot, but it still applies to the group total. So being able to push your damage, push your survivability, push your group support, and all that stuff is what makes you a better tank in the long run. But it also makes you better in group play, because you have all these different tools that play on the group and allow the group greater survivability, greater playability, and all that. So it makes it easier to play as a beginner. Until you become more comfortable with the mechanics of the game and the encounters, this kind of build really helps in that situation, because it gives you a decent amount of DPS. It gives you a decent amount of survivability, or good survivability, good playability, with all the extra healing and everything else you got going on, you don't die as quickly. Now, of course, as always, we're going to jump into our champion points, and this is another area where people are going to question how I have it set up. I don't follow the meta when it comes to CP, and there's a reason for that, because the CP that a lot of tanks use isn't necessary in my opinion. Because if you get used to playing the mechanics more than you do, or facing the mechanics more than you do facing like a speedrun or something, like you're going meta play and you're going for that really fast speedrun, if you're facing the mechanics, having the necessary resources and CP for that really works out a lot better. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have for CP. Starting with the red tree, we have 56 in Ironclad. Now this reduces incoming damage or direct damage by 20%. Now this does stack with other CP bonuses and damage reduction things, such as the 8% damage reduction you get from minor protection. Moving on, we have 31 into Thick Skin. This reduces your damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. We have 43 into Hardy. This reduces physical poison disease damage by 10%. And we have 43 into Elemental Defender, reducing Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 10%. Remember, all these things stack with the minor protection and major protection. If your group is using both, that's even more damage mitigation you're going to get. And those protections also apply to your shields, by the way. Moving on to the next one, we have 40 into Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of damage shields by 16%. This includes the Brands of Imperium set shield and your own shield. So you're going to get increased shield strength, which gives you greater survivability. Next, we have 19 into Quick Recovery, and this reduces incoming or increases healing received by 5%. Now we have 38 into here, but you can change this. If you're getting too much physical resist, take this down by 8, we'll say, and then put the 8 into your light armor focus, or not light armor focus, sorry, into your spell shield, which increases your spell resistance by 8-11. Confirm it, and you'll see that you go to 23 and 21, almost 22 here, and it'll still give you a really good amount of physical and spell resist even on the back bar, so you still have 30 and 30 pretty much, so it still works out. Oops. Alright, so you can have 30 here and 8 into the spell shield. Moving on to the green tree, we have 40 into Warlord. This reduces break free cost by 16%. We have 16 into Sprinter, reducing sprint cost by 10%. 16 into Bashing Focus, reducing bash cost by 10%. As a tank, these three are really important. Even though a lot of people don't realize, being able to sprint, dodge roll, break free, all that stuff is really important for a tank, because you're the one on the front line. You're the one facing down the boss. You're going to get all this, you're going to need all this stuff. So, just letting you know. Moving on, we have 43 into Arcanus. This increases mag recovery by 10%. We have 75 into Tenacity. This increases fully charged heavy attacks and how much they restore magicka or stamina by 14%. And it is 14%. A lot of people say it's like 13.98%, but it's not. It's actually 14%. I've tested this thoroughly, explicitly. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Moving on, we have 40 into Tumbling. Now you can change you can change some of these CP things if you want to, but 40 into Tumbling reduces dodge roll cost by 16%. You are wearing one piece of medium armor, so you're actually getting 4% reduced dodge roll. You actually get a 20% reduced dodge roll rate. Then we have 40 into Shadow Ward, which reduces your block cost by 16%. When you add this to the 16% you're already getting, or 20% you're 16%, sorry, you're already getting, you actually get a lot of block cost reduction with this and the sturdy pieces you have. Moving on to the blue tree, we have 43 into Bless. This increases healing done by 10%. This helps with your vigor, your ring of preservation, and your other ability, Ritual Retribution, in healing not only you but your allies. Moving on to the middle tree here, we have 35 in a physical weapon expert. This increases light and heavy attacks with all melee weapons and bow, or physical weapons and bow, by 20%. And this helps with that 1800 weapon damage as well. And then we have 40 in the Mastered Arms, which increases the damage done with direct damage attacks by 16%. This applies to light and heavy attacks as well. It also gives you riposte, so people don't freak out, which increases your, or reduces your block, or when you block, you have a chance of redirecting damage back to enemies. This can happen every 5 seconds. It's actually a decent amount of damage, and it happens quite a bit. You get Retaliation and you get Butcher, which increases your damage done to light and heavy attacks by 5% when enemies are below 25% health. And this applies to that 1800 damage, weapon damage as well. So it's a really good one to go with that Gladiator set. Moving on, we have 56 in the Mighty. This increases your physical poison disease damage by 12%. 56 in a Precise Strikes, increasing critical damage and healing with stamina-based abilities. Now remember, every ability you use with this build is based off your max stamina. So including your Ritual of Retribution, which is a magic-based ability, but it goes off your highest offensive stat, is affected by this. So your Ring of Retribution, Vigor, and the other one are all affected by this. So this is why we want that 56 points there, to get that 20% critical chance when it does critically heal. And then we have 40 in the Thaumaturge, which increases your damage done with damage over time effects by 16%. So that's the reason why this build works the way it does. That's why we use the sets we're using, is we want to maximize every potential thing we have. Now, just like with all builds, I'm going to take this into a dungeon, and there is a particular dungeon I always play testing, and that is the Depths of Malatar. Malatar is just a really good one for the fact that the first boss encounter is only like 2 groups in, so you have to take on 2 groups of enemies, and then you get to the boss. And this way you guys can see how the build works. You can kind of get an idea of the feel of it. And it'll also show you how well this build can work in a DLC dungeon on normal, if you're farming gear on normal. Like if you're just farming the sets that drop in these dungeons for somebody, like monster, like not including monster sets, this build is great for that. If you're farming it on veteran, this build is also great for it. So like this build will play through normal and veteran. So it's made to survive dungeons. So first things first, buff your shields, get your resistances up, and then all your other stuff. And like I said, I like using Dawnbreaker because it helps in those ways that allow you to get that higher group DPS, because you don't need Warhorn in a trash fight. You really don't, because trash is just trash. You don't need the higher damage output. You don't need the higher stuff. You're going to be doing a lot of heavy attacks, like I said. So taking advantage of that higher damage that you can do from heavy attacks, which isn't much, as you can see. I mean, we're not really getting that much. But we also have the Sharpen weapon, so we're getting that higher penetration from it. And then you can see the light and heavy attacks actually go to about 6k, which is a major improvement. Regardless of what many will say, it's a big improvement, especially when you crit and you do like 10k. That really helps, your group with that higher DPS output. So we're going to run back here. And we're back here, just going to run back, drop all this stuff. And I'm going to show you how the taunt works as well. So I'm going to back up here. And you can see the taunt works really well with that ability to keep those enemies at range pulled in, and more damage being done to them by AoEs and things like that. And remember, Deep Slash will hit multiple targets, as I said. So we can do some heavy attacks here and get our resources up. We can Deep Slash this enemy, and it's going to hit multiple targets. It's going to keep that maim on them, which is really good for keeping our our people alive, keeping us alive, especially with the lower health. And again, the highest resource pool is basically there so you can keep all these other abilities you have that are stamina based active while still blocking. And just throwing out a couple heavy attacks here and there, because you don't really need to block constantly. The only time you really need to block constantly is certain boss encounters, and even then you don't have to block as much as people think if you know how to watch for mechanics. So, alright, now we're going to go in. This is the first boss room. If you are unfamiliar with this boss has a lot of area of effect damage. This is another reason why this build works out really well in that situation, because you got all these things that help with keeping your group alive a little bit, including all this extra damage and stuff that you can deal, and all this extra protection you can do for you and your allies. So, and you also have to remember, this is also on normal mode, not on veterans, so it's not as challenging. I'm going to let my character get killed now. But I just wanted you to see how well it works. It actually works out really well, and even though the tank isn't made to do damage, having that extra weapon damage pool does apply to two things here that a lot of people don't realize: your damage shield and your Ritual of Retribution. And then on top of that, it also applies to the Ring of Preservation. So, 2 damage, your main damage, or not your main damage shield, but your sword and shield damage shield, the Absorption Missile, is affected by your weapon damage. So the higher weapon damage you have, the higher power the shield works. And a lot of people don't realize that, because most shields work off of a max health. This one, the shield itself, it scales off your max health, but the heal scales off your weapon damage. That's what I wanted to say. So having that greater weapon damage really helps in that sense. So now it doesn't apply to when you get the 1800 weapon damage, because that only applies to light and heavy attacks. But the rest of the time you have that higher weapon damage, it applies to that. And if somebody's using Spell Power Cure or Olorums, and they're giving you that buff, then it gives you increased weapon and spell damage, that applies to this as well. It also applies to your vigor, the amount of healing it does. It applies to your Flawless Dawnbreaker, and this 300 weapon damage gets applied to your whole character, so it applies again to your vigor, it applies to your Absorb Missile, it applies to your Ring of Preservation, and it even applies to your Ritual of Retribution. And it does apply to the damage from Inner Beast, the damage from Pierce Armor, and the damage from Deep Slash. So all these things are being affected in different ways in the way the build works. So having all these different tools really allows this build to be flexible in any environment. Whether you're playing in a dungeon, you're playing in Overland, you're playing in a small group taking on a world boss, or you're playing at an Abyssal Geyser, you're playing with a group at a Dark Anchor, you're playing with a group at one of the dragons. All these things apply to that area of play. You're aiding your allies that are nearby, and it doesn't matter if they're in a group or not, because you can still apply vigor to them. They can still take advantage of the minor protection and stamina recovery and the heal from this and this. So there's a lot of things that you have to understand that this build does that a lot of other builds don't do. And that's because, 1, you're a Templar. 2, you have all these tools at your benefit, and these sets that apply to those benefits. So it's a really good mixed thing. And with the Brands of Imperium, Swarm Mothers, and Gladiators, you have a lot of other tools or bonuses that apply to you and your group in different ways. So it works out really well. And even though a lot of people don't like these kind of builds, I prefer them over meta builds, no offense, but that's because they give you so much more to do. They give you so much more playability and more exciting ways to play the game. So, but that's it for the build. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, you guys know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. And also remember to click on that little notification bell for when I post new videos. I try to post videos daily. I haven't been doing such a good job lately. But I'll get into that here soon. I'm going to be releasing a video explaining what's been going on and why I haven't been posting videos as often. There is stuff going on. So, and it might bring some things to light. But I am going to try and get in a routine of constantly posting videos Monday through Friday, as I always did in the past, and starting today with this, the Paladin. So, but as always, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.